Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast. I am your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by your co-host, Seth Wilson. Seth, how's it going today?
Thomas, I'm doing great. I am really excited about our conversation today. We've kind of been kicking around the topic of today, which is how do you, as a lawyer, when you've got your firm up and running, how do you handle some of these conversations where the situation is somewhat difficult, either for you to get your head around or just there's an emotional component to what's going on, or all the various aspects that you as a lawyer will be called upon by your clients to have answers to. And so I thought that'd be a good topic for today. We're heading into the spring break season and post spring break, and so different situations come up as a result of that. And you and I both face different things at our practice, so it's kind of good preparation, I think, for the lawyer who's building the practice to know how to have some strategy for what to do in these tough conversations.
Yeah, so lawyers have difficult conversations. So, if you're thinking about going into personal injury, you've got injured people that you're going to be talking to, or family members of those that are injured that are going through a stressful situation, or maybe it's family law, you going through divorce or child custody issues, estate planning. Maybe you've got some family difficulties with children or with parents or grandparents. Um, and so it just runs the gamut, the whatever area of practice you're going to be in, stressful conversations are going to happen in your practice. And the attorney needs to be prepared for that and develop some, I don't know, almost coping mechanisms. How do you deal with the stress in that conversation, and not let it get to you? Acknowledge the stress, but also be able to be present in the moment to give the advice that is needed. So, I think the first thing that I would say is you need to listen. You need to listen very carefully. For me, it's easiest for me to listen by taking some notes here and there, and just writing down the names of people that the client is mentioning, so that I can kind of track. Okay, they're talking about John, and John is this person's brother, and then Jerry, he's the son involved in the situation, for example. That kind of thing helps me to kind of get my mind around all the players that are involved. And so that's my first strategy, is just make sure that I'm following the conversation and jotting in my notes so that I can help the conversation move forward by referencing those names throughout my conversation with the client. So uh, listening is absolutely key, and you got to be an active listener. So if there is something that you don't understand, something that you missed, ask the follow-up question. What did you mean by this? Who are you talking about? Did I hear you correctly? Questions like that follow up with the client and make sure that we're on the right track, because you don't want to get in a situation where the client has had a 5-minute dialogue here, monologue, and you need to go back, and try to reiterate, figure out what you talked about in the first 30 seconds of the monologue. So I would say active listening is the starting point to these client conversations.
Yeah, and let me kind of dovetail that with the other part of that is you do have to exercise some patience, because the clients or client may come in and they have a lot of anxiety that they're bringing to the table. This is maybe the first time they've met with a lawyer, and they have every question that they're trying to get answered and figure out, and all of the things that have happened, and they want to make sure that they communicate everything and don't forget this, and while I've got your attention I need you to ask. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, and you need to allow that sort of uh, brain dump to occur, the emotional dump to occur. Like they're
Yes.
taking those wheelbarrows in and they're just dumping out all this stuff onto the table. And you need to have some patience with that. And I think that's a great admonition to be an active listener in that conversation so that you can help steer things a little bit. But if you're listening with the intent of giving them an answer right away just to get them back out of the office, that's also going to be communicated in how they felt while you were interacting with them. And so there's a lot of emotional intelligence, I think, that the lawyer can bring to bear on a situation to help regulate where things are, hopefully calm things down enough to have a conversation, relieve some of the nerves that may be there to say, hey, this is a tough situation and it's okay. I always kind of joke with clients to try to let the air out of the balloon a little bit of, hey, I meet people in really strange ways. Most of the time, you're coming to see the lawyer because something's going on and it's not always good. And so that's kind of an odd way to meet somebody at their lowest or most traumatic time and help them through a situation. And they can kind of appreciate that and just say, it's all right. We'll get things figured out. And I think that's a hard thing as well when you're trying to sort through all of the issues and come up with a proposed plan of resolution, and you don't know what to do. And
Yeah.
so, as the lawyer, they're looking to you for advice on how do I get out of this impossible situation? And I'm just sitting there saying, you're right. This is an impossible situation. I don't know what to do either. But just kind of acknowledging that and helping them get to a point where they can relieve some of the stress of whatever's going on and then start working through, like you say, hey, tell me a little bit more about this piece of the puzzle and that piece of the puzzle. I think using names of individuals, using the situation, or whatever sort of phraseology that the client was using, repeating that back to them so that they feel like you're definitely tracking with and understanding what their issue is or their issues are.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that I notice as well. Clients come to you and they just launch into the whole story, and it can take 5 minutes, it can take 10 minutes before you actually see them take a breath. And then that's your cue to actually start those active listening questions and really filling out the details of the whole story. Um, and I think that that's partly what people like about, coming to an attorney. They like to be able to tell the whole story and then defer to the attorney to really get to it. So I think that's great that you say just let them talk, let them talk. You listen, but you wait until they've taken a breath to start the questions. Um, and we're talking about difficult client conversations. That's pretty much the story for every single difficult client conversation. It starts with just a litany of facts, and you're just jotting notes, getting what you can down, and then once they take a breath, then you're ready to really delve into the details of it. And I would add to what we've said so far that don't come into it with a preconceived notion of what needs to be done. A lot of times I look at the appointment on my calendar, I look at the file, and I think, okay, I think this is probably going to be an estate planning situation. Maybe it's just a basic last will and testament that we're going to do. And then, in my practice, maybe it actually turns into, between the time that the client called and the appointment, we've got somebody that is now in the hospital, and we've got to deal with a nursing home situation now. So your conversation is going to be a lot different than what you might expect. So just be listening and let the client kind of lead the conversation at the very beginning until we get to a point where they say, because of I said all that, now what do you think? And that's your cue to do that. But don't come into it with preconceived notions.
Yeah. And I think another point on that, Thomas, I try to bring into the conversation is as I'm thinking through figuring out and listening to what's going on, realizing that if this is a case that's going to involve a judge or a jury, how are the judge or the jury going to receive the information? So I know I'm going to have some time to work with the client and figure out these issues, and I've got all these different competing things going on. When you present that to the trier of fact, you have a very limited window of time to do that. And the judge doesn't have the opportunity to get to know your client. They don't have, it's going to be an hour at most, or half a day, or whatever it may be. And so you're trying to think through all of those issues as well as you're presenting and figuring this out. And I think that's helpful when you are in the court system to understand, wow, this must be what the judge feels like every time I come into the courtroom, where we're just presenting a bunch of stuff and the judge is trying to figure out what needs to go on. And so being organized, having a plan, and working through that is really helpful, because you have to get to the essence of what's going on for the client. And it looks like we may be having a little bit of technical difficulty with Thomas's connection today. So we'll kind of wrap up today's topic by summarizing what we've already talked about in terms of dealing with difficult client conversations. We have kind of the first suggestion is that active listening and asking questions that help clarify and shape the conversation with the prospective client, and also being patient with those clients. This may be the first interaction they've ever had with a lawyer. They may be nervous. They've obviously got a lot of different things going on with their situation. And so how do you help them help you and calm them down and get them ready to look at the situation and come up with a proposal that hopefully can help move them forward? And so as you face those opportunities in your practice, take time to make good notes and ask good questions and prepare yourself as you go into those meetings, that you don't have to come with all the answers right away. Sometimes the best thing to do is just to listen and allow the client to get out what needs to get out, and then start figuring out how to work together with that client to achieve the outcome they need to achieve. So we are the Lifetime Legacy Lawyers podcast. You can find us on YouTube. We have the Lifetime Legacy Lawyers handle, and we also have an audio version of the podcast that's available, and we'll link to those items in the show notes. And we will look forward to seeing everyone on the next episode.